Hello, and welcome to the Vedic Conversation, where each episode we take a different topic and look at it through the lens of storytelling and from the perspective of the Veda, an ancient but still very much relevant body of knowledge from India. I'm Derrick Yanford, a Vedic meditation teacher based in New York City, and I'm joined by my Vedic colleagues Thompson in London and Rory Kinsella in Sydney. Today's guest is a true leader and innovator in the meditation community who has used his skill and knowledge to continue to get meditation into the hands of as many people as possible. Jonni Pollard is the co-founder of One Giant Mind, a meditation technique that since 2011 has helped hundreds of thousands of people around the world learn how to meditate through their free apps and events. Today, they also train passionate meditators to bring the benefits of meditation to the world through in-person and online courses. The mission of One Giant Mind is to inspire millions of people around the world to take up meditation as a daily practice and live more fulfilling lives free from the negative impacts of stress. Jonni is also the author of The Golden Sequence, a manual for reclaiming our humanity, a podcast host, guest speaker, father of two, a teacher, mentor, and a friend. It is with great pleasure and an absolute honor to welcome Jonni to our show. Jonni, it is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome you to our show.
Thank you, Derrick. It's such a pleasure to be here with you gentlemen to talk about whatever it is we're going to talk about.
Yeah, so I guess first things first, a little bit congratulations, because I know that you just had your second
Or a
child.
lot. It's the most significant thing, to happen. The first was extraordinary and the second was just as extraordinary. So it's really just such a remarkable thing.
And just
So transformational.
And you had a boy, correct?
Yeah, a little boy. He's 4 weeks old.
4 weeks. And what's his name?
Hence the bags under my eyes.
What's your little boy's name?
Himalaya Deva.
Kamalia Deva.
Named after the Himalayas,
Oh,
obviously. And Deva.
beautiful.
Yeah, Himalaya Deva Pollard.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah.
Awesome.
And his sister's name is Safira Devi Pollard.
I remember right after you had him, you sent a little video of your daughter with him in her arms. I just thought it was the most adorable thing. Just your whole family it was so cute. So congratulations.
Yeah.
As I do not have children and I have no plans of ever having them. So
yeah.
Thank you for showing up.
I'll send you some videos every now and then so you can live vicariously through me. One of the most extraordinary bonuses of the second child is the relationship between the two children. We were anticipating that Safira was actually going to, have some issues because she's got such a big personality. But she's just been so adorable with him and affectionate, accepting, and it just melts our heart. We've got a whole bunch of these videos of these two interacting. They're our highlight moments, really. So yeah, it's a special thing.
Beautiful. I guess with that, I'm curious if you wouldn't mind talking maybe a little bit about your childhood and the things that kind of led you to meditation, because from my understanding, there was something that was going on inside of you at a very young age that you recognized being a little bit different of how you saw the world and how other people in your family or people your age saw the world, that you knew you needed to explore and discover a little bit more. So if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about that journey in your childhood, what led you to meditation?
Sure. So I'll caveat, all of this with the understanding that, what I'm going to share is a very broad brushstroke of a very complex understanding, having done a lot of work, going into the past to free myself of the impressions that had governed or at least attempted to dominate, my sensory experience. And I'll talk about it generally, with respect and with regard to, the players in the story that may not necessarily appreciate me divulging, lots of juicy details. What I can share with you is that it was very challenging from a very young age, in so much as that, nature orchestrated circumstances for me to have to be very clear about who I was and to be able to stand in myself, stand my ground, in the face of certain characters that were just grossly disconnected from, their sense of conscience and, what's right. Um, and um, and so uh, with that, at such an early age, I think I was kind of pressurized into reality, in a unique way where I was forced, in order to feel okay about myself, to actually know myself. There was an intuition there that I knew that if I was in contact with myself, things were okay. If I was not in contact with myself, and that I was to succumb to the um, the ideas that could easily be generated about who you are as a person by being exposed to certain behavior and belief systems and attitudes, particularly abusive, you can very easily adopt an idea of worthlessness, of, being of no great value or relevance and significance, being a hindrance. And, as a child, you can very easily adopt these ideas. And I remember tussling very consciously with my sense of worth at too young an age. But and only in retrospect, many years later in my teens, was I kind of like, oh wow, I was aware of all of that. But during it, this tussle inside of myself of bringing myself back into myself, in the face of, the adversity that I was confronted with, um, was a wonderful training ground for who I was to become. It was, as they say, beautiful karma that was bittersweet in its taste, mainly bitter in its initial stages. But, as consciousness, awake, lively consciousness does, it becomes the alchemist and it transmutes bitterness into bliss if we can, move deeply enough into the pain and through it and be on the other side and see the immense value of how it constructed uh, uh, a stable state of consciousness to perceive the truth of reality. And this is what, my childhood gifted me, as, rough as it was. Um, and, I was baptized Church of England in a Catholic school, so I was not very well accepted there, but I was deeply passionate about religious studies, fascinated by that character Jesus. And so, topped religion to the dismay of the nuns, that, a Protestant would, understand Catholicism more than Catholics. And um, so there was always a sense of great displacement, um, not belonging. And I think that long term was like a slingshot, rubber being pulled back, to bah, like shoot me into really understanding what it means to belong. Because the more I didn't belong, the more uncomfortable I felt about life, and to the point that in my mid-teens, it became so uncomfortable that I made it almost my entire thing by my sort of late teens. It was like, what does it mean to belong? Who am I in the universe? What is the meaning of my existence? Like, I went to the very root of what belonging is by understanding what I am as an entity. What am I? What am I doing here? What purpose do I have as a human being on this planet? Why? What's the purpose of any of this? And initially kind of chucked it all out and just went, like this to everything. And then gently realized that over time, thanks to, the sweetness of Vedic knowledge, brought me back into understanding the relevance of everything. it turned into a far more gentle, graceful, sort of sweet song that ultimately led me to, wanting to share what I was learning and discovering about myself with others.
Beautiful. Now, am I correct in thinking that it was in your teens was the first time you went to India? Or was
Late teens, yeah. It's like, I think it was 19, yeah.
Okay, and so
I'm 19.
if you would mind just talking a little bit about that, because I did not go to India until I was in my 40s, and it was such an amazing experience for me. And I wonder what it would have been like for me as a teenager going there, especially in search of this understanding of who am I and belonging. So
Yeah.
can you just maybe talk about what initiated
Yeah.
that and how you were a little bit different after visiting India?
Yeah. Well, I was very anti-guru. I didn't want to. I'm like, I don't want anybody's version of anything, in my teens. It was all about just I'll work this out myself. And I hit a brick wall, and I met a woman that just was so beautiful. Her presence was just beautiful. It's the best way to put it. She saw me. She was very wise, very spiritually evolved woman. Well beyond my capacity to understand what she was seeing. She could see me, and I wasn't able to see me the way she knew me better than I did in that moment. And she very, very, just sweetly just said, "I think you should go to India." And she showed me a picture of her guru. It was Satya Sai Baba. He's a very famous saint in India, very controversial now. And I looked at his photo and I just went, "No way!" What am I going to do with this guy? And she's like, "Well, everything you're talking about," because I expressed to her many things that I was experiencing. I was having, massive consciousness expansive experiences in my teens. Things were happening that were so far beyond, my capacity at that stage to explain. And I was overwhelmed and a little confused. In our language, I was having big GC experiences, probably well before, a stabilized state of CC. So, and didn't know how to process it, didn't know what to make of it. And she encouraged me to go to India. And I kind of went, thanks, but no thanks. And then maybe, a couple of weeks later, he appeared. Well, I had a dream of one of the main characters who was the nemesis of my childhood, antagonizing me in the way that he did. And I would stare at, in the dream, I remember reacting to him in the way that I did, when I was less resolved. And then this character morphed into Sai Baba in front of me, like shapeshifted into Sai Baba, and he was giggling. He goes, "Oh, so you think you've dealt with all of that?" And I was like, "Oh," he's like, "It's time, come," like this. And I went, "All right," and I woke up immediately. And it was just like, whoa, did that just happen? Yeah, that just happened. Okay, next day I went down to, back in those days, the only way you could book a ticket was to go down to a place called Flight Center. Your local, flight tourist, what are they called?
Travel agent.
Travel consultant, your travel agent, yeah. And I bought a paper ticket. At the age of 19, I pulled all my money out of my savings account. I reckon it's like, I know, $1,200 return. It was very expensive.
Wow, yeah.
And I probably had an extra $500 or $600 in my pocket. And I managed to get on a flight. It was like, I don't know how I did. It was like 4 or 5 days later. I had to go to the doctor and I had to get a shot of something, and that made me crook for a day. And then next thing you know, I'm on a plane to Bangalore, and kind of just did it, which is the way I was anyway. I was very kind of like, whatever, let's go, flippant as a teenager. And I arrived at an airport that looked like, the remnants of Chernobyl. It was like so beat up from the feet up. This place was like run down. It was raining and there was water pouring into where we're walking. You have to walk around puddles and whatever. It was all like analog, no computers, nothing. They just, write on a piece of paper. They look at your passport and they write on a piece of paper. The guy's sitting there smoking, and, they usher you out. And I remember being greeted by a girl that would have been about 16 in a sari, quite beautiful, with a newborn baby in her arm, going like this. And I'm like, you don't have food? Like trying to communicate to her. This is my first time experiencing, third world poverty. And she's like, like this. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, I mean, I transferred some money. So I pulled out a wad of cash. And it was, I can't remember what it was, would have been, 5 rupee or something. And I give it to her. And then before I could blink my eye, I was surrounded by another 20 women, young girls, all no one over the age of 20, with newborn babies going, da, 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 and I'm like, and then a man rushes over before I get the last little bit of my money and goes, quick, put it in your pocket, sir. It's like, go to all of these girls, and they're sort of like, hey. It was their little thing that they do, they come and they target people like me to, get a little bit of money. And I was so overwhelmed by that. I'm like, and then when I walked out of the airport, this was still in the airport. When I walked out of the airport, there was another like 50 of them. And so I was so completely overwhelmed that I locked myself away in a hotel room for 2 days just to kind of acclimatize. But I noticed that there was something energetic happening to me. I was very overwhelmed emotionally being back in India, and it felt like I'd spent more lifetimes than not in this place. And it was just a resurgence of emotion and familiarity, and it was just complex emotions, the smells, the atmosphere, everything about it. It's so like visceral. It penetrates every cell of you, right? It's just so overwhelming. And then I finally got the courage to call a taxi about 2 or 3 days later to take me down to the ashram. And I had like a 14-year-old driving this taxi, and I honestly thought I was going to die. That trip to Puttaparthi was like, some karma in itself. Anyway, I arrived at the ashram. I spent about a month there. And while I never had a face-to-face with Sai Baba, he was very present in the same way it was in my dreams. He was very present in my dreams and in my meditation. And he always said, I'm not going to be your guru. You will find another guru, another tradition, another lineage. And I'm here just to kind of bake you a little bit, prep you. And, in my meditations, he shared mantras and things, and there were senior teachers that I spoke to, and they'd teach me things, and I started a meditation practice, and, started studying and reading. I, read the Ramayana back then and a bunch of other things, and just started getting my head around it. And by the end of it, I had a clear understanding of what I was going through, and that it wasn't in any way, shape, or form unique. It was an inevitability that all human beings will eventually arrive at, which is an awakening to themselves. And it just got me really clear. I just felt very comfortable in India, very assured by the Vedic knowledge, and very open to learning from, teachers from that point. I kind of matured in that month. Sort of got over myself and went, oh my God, this is incredible. There's so much to learn here. And I did, and that's where I started a beautiful romance with the Vedic tradition and India. And it's been a long one since, beautiful experience.
That's a beautiful story. And thank you for sharing, because I knew some of it, but none of those details. And I'm curious, when you returned to Australia after having kind of followed this vision that you had, did you recognize like a profound difference of who you were, or were people saying, who is this Jonni, or was it more subtle than that?
Subtle.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I was more nuanced. I think I was less of a pain in the ass. You've got to remember, in the 90s, when late 90s, early 2000s, when this was all taking place, I was an oddball. Meditation was like, what? You know, I didn't drink. I didn't eat meat. Um, I was really an oddball. I was a leader among my peers, you know, but they were always like, "What's he up to now?" sort of thing. And it was, yeah. So it was, all of this was very, very strange to everybody. And you know, I go on these rants about the nature of reality. And I was kind of learning it as I was saying it, you know, where you're just starting to cognize. I was, you know, at an early age, I was cognizing my teens, but I had no kind of, you know, etiquette, no decorum. You know, I would just like lawnmower over people, you know, my opinions and things. It was very ungraceful, and it would really shake people up. And, you know, it was kind of like when people saw me for a while, they were kind of like, well, what's he going to say now? You know, what's he going to do? And, you know, I learned the hard way about, you know, worthy inquiry, and, you know, the wise don't bewilder you know, the, the uninquiring mind. I learned that the really hard way, you know, at a young age. And when I came back from India, what I noticed was that I was more contained and less, um, just more aware of the impact of my presence. Let's put it that way, and notice that my presence carried value in a way that I could use it to cause elevation and not disruption, disturbance in a destructive way. You know, I became more gentle. Yeah.
Beautiful.
And I think that was seen and appreciated by my friends. Yeah.
Jonni, you mentioned that Sai Baba had said to you that he wasn't going to be your guru, and you had set off to India with a sort of slightly anti-guru disposition.
Well, actually, to be clear, I on my way to India, I kind of started becoming seduced by the idea that when I get to India, this guy is going to just go, finally, my star pupil has arrived. Come sit by me, and I will pour all of my knowledge into you. I had these delusions, these fantasies that he was going to, see me, and that was it. I was going to live in India, and it was all going to be just like, that was it.
That's what happens when you fly at 40,000 feet for several hours.
Yeah.
It's the lack of oxygen.
Yeah.
So you arrive in India more amenable to the idea of finding a guru. So if he wasn't your guru, who was? Or who became your guru or gurus?
Well, he, as much as I didn't, I didn't totally accept that position from him. You know, there was a picture of Sai Baba on my puja table for maybe 7 years. Prior to being exposed to the Shankaracharya tradition. And I'd been exposed to other Vedic traditions and lineages, but none of them really kind of made me go, oh yeah, until I heard Tom G speak, and I was like, oh my goodness, this man's capacity to articulate things that I am experiencing is extraordinary. And to cut a long story short, it was in one of his retreats. I'd learned Vedic meditation with Gary Goro, and we were hanging out for probably about 6 months, and I was kind of just reluctant for some reason or another. It took me about 6 months for me to come around to agreeing to learn the technique, to do the puja, and for him to give me a mantra, and immediately it was extraordinary. I was like, wow, this is something. This technique is really special. And then Gary is a fine exponent of the knowledge as well, and he sort of what do you call it? Prime the engine.
Mm-hmm.
He primed me with some beautiful dissertations on the Vedic worldview from our particular tradition, and then introduced me to Tom, and that kind of, I think on one of the first rounding retreats I ever went on with Tom, I I forked out whatever money I had to have a one-on-one with him, and I had like 5 questions for him that sort of were the gnawing questions, and it's mainly to do with the sequence of states of consciousness. What did this experience mean, and how do you link it to this? It was a bunch of things that I was pieces of the puzzle that still were missing, that I couldn't see the whole picture. And he just went, take that, take that, take that, take that. And I just went, all in about the space of 15 minutes. What he did in 15 minutes for me, was, so completing in my pursuit to that point. And that just had a profound impact on my consciousness, on my experience. The unfoldment that occurred as a result of just that. To have an individual have such profound accuracy. He saw exactly where I was at, and he just went, just said a couple of things, piece it together, went, that doesn't really matter, forget about that, focus on this, and that's what I did. And then I, dedicated myself to, as earnestly and as, with such diligence and fervor as I could muster, as I'd done previously, by the way. I was an absolute nerd. It was tough to be around me if you weren't into, expanding a state of consciousness. And, I just completely lent myself to every word that he said, and took everything that he said very literally, and applied it with maximum vigilance and diligence. And it caused a profound quickening of things in my consciousness, and that led me ultimately to the notion that it would make sense that if I'm going to teach, because that was the conclusion that I arrived at, was like, oh yeah, I really need to be a teacher in this. I always imagined that as something that I do when I kind of looked more like you, Anthony, with a a white beard and hair, yeah. But took up the call to action that Tom is always laying out to people to become teachers. So he played a massive role. I also deeply dedicated myself to the spirit of Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and Swami Brahmananda Saraswati, Shankara himself, and dedicated myself to the puja and to the masters within the tradition to really develop a relationship that whilst practicing the siddhis, created an extraordinary foundation for what is my experience now. Yeah.
And when did you get the inspiration for One Giant Mind, and did you think that it would have the impact that it has?
Well, it's kind of iterated on itself over time. One Giant Mind was actually initially a collaboration with myself, Tom's son Charlie, Gary Goro, and a couple of others that weren't teachers. And the idea was that we were going to try and pull together the largest group of people we could at regular intervals to meditate together. And when we say large, we're talking, the goal was like tens of millions. And collaborate with leading researchers in consciousness studies that have instrumentality to measure the impact of, coherence created by masses of people meditating together, to see what kind of effect it would have, and use that as a kind of a mouthpiece for a good reason to learn to meditate, as a part of a sort of social responsibility call to action. And that was a pretty extraordinary period of time. We had some really wonderful people involved. And I spearheaded all of that and traveled the world for probably 2 years, meeting with spiritual leaders from all different traditions, as well as leading scientists, everywhere from the US to Russia. I went to St. Petersburg and met with some pretty incredible quantum physicists and other bio-quantum physicists, like that have all extraordinary instruments that can measure consciousness. And And so it was looking really good. You know, we were pulling this thing together. I'd had, you know, so many people, so many great teachers with big followings, you know, hundreds of millions, some of them, agreeing that this was a good idea. And then we had an opportunity to fly to Dharamsala to have an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And so we flew there and we met with him, which was probably one of the most, he was definitely one of the most profound presence that I've experienced. You know, he stepped out of a teaching where he had 4,000 people in their hall to come and talk with us. And he met us and greeted me like a long lost friend. And with such warmth and love and sincerity, and just gave me such undivided attention. It was extraordinary. He was just the real deal, like just zero. He's like, so why am I here? Tell me what you have to tell me. I'm excited. Yeah. And so I started explaining what we'd been doing. And while I'm explaining it, he's holding my hand with two hands like this. So when he talks to you, he holds your hand and he just leans in and he's just listening. And you don't realize how old he is until you get really, really close. He's got like cataract, really cloudy eyes. And, you know, when you really look into his eyes, it's like, oh, wow, you're old. You're really old. But he charges around like he's on, you know, he's got ever-ready batteries.
I hope you didn't say that. Man, you're old.
No. Wow, you're so much older than I thought. Yeah. But his presence was just radiant, beautiful. And he held me, you know, with his hands and he's like, so tell me, talk to me, tell me. And so I told him, you know, very generous, I told him the whole deal, you know, we've got these scientists and these people and what we want to do. He's like, yeah, okay, yeah, okay, as I'm talking like this. And then at the end he goes, okay, you're finished? And I went, yeah. And he goes, okay, so in principle I like it. I'm doing a terrible Dalai Lama accent. He goes, in principle I like it, but I'm going to say no, like this. And I was just like, like, no, the Dalai Lama just like rejected me. And I went, okay. And he goes, you see, we cannot expose something so precious as this idea to science. And I went, okay. He's like, look. And as he started talking to me, it wasn't two hands anymore. It was one hand, and he was squeezing it, and he was pulling it. He was pulling my arm, like going, listen to what I'm saying, read between the lines, listen to what I'm saying. He goes, we cannot make this about science, squeezing me. He goes, make it about love. He goes, if you get people to come together in the name of love, I'm 100% on board. Like this. And I went, okay. And he said, but do not make it about science. He goes, it will get destroyed. And I don't even think he said it that, because he has a lot of people investing in him that are science-based. But he was basically, what he said was, I am the master of survival and marketing here. What he said to me in his silence was, I escaped in exile from one of the most treacherous regimes on the planet. And now I am the leader of the fastest growing religion in the world. And I asked every superpower, every major leader in the world to help me. Everyone knocked me back because they were afraid of my enemy. And so I was on my own. And so he mastered the art of adorability to have the world fall in love with him and to adopt the world's most obscure religion. Because when you look under the hood of Tibetan Buddhism, it's obscure as it gets. And this is genius. This is power. This is like, because, what he would have had to have overcome emotionally, what was happening to his people, his monasteries are thousands of years old, or at least 1,000 years old. All of the relics, everything being destroyed, all of the senior lamas and monks being murdered, and here he is just traveling the world, spreading Dharma, spreading the love. And he like squeezing my hand going, listen, mate, I've been around the block a few times. He goes, it was like, if you do this, you'll do it. I can see that you'll pull this off, and don't do it. And so we left, we talked about some other things, and he invited me to join his party for the Kumbh Mela. God knows why I didn't go. I mean, I'm not a regretful guy, but that was one I should have taken up. And then we left, and my head was spinning for about 5 days because the year and a half, 18 months to 24 months of work that we invested prior to that, it all sort of felt like it disappeared. I felt like I had to let it go, and I did. We did as a team. We're like, we need to pivot here and do something different, and so we decided to create an app. And the first version of the app was clunky, but had some effect. What we realized is that at the end of the day, what we were trying to do is to get people to learn to meditate. As Vedic meditators, we wanted to see how we could experiment with, without compromising the preciousness of what we teach in the Vedic tradition, how to bring people to the practice and hopefully to a robust practice like ours. And so the app went through some iterations, and I experimented and explored introducing universal mantras with a very sort of general instruction that is akin to Vedic meditation. Like several other traditions, they have a set of different mantras and loosely the same kind of instruction. And so I explored that, and that proved to be very effective and very successful. And so we introduced that into the app, and that app now has, we don't really know how many people it's taught, probably about 500,000, I'd say, people to meditate, and has brought, I'd like to think at least several thousand people to Vedic meditation as a result of it. So it's and further to that, I know a bunch of Vedic meditation teachers that started their journey with the One Giant Mind app. So and that was always the intention. How do we cast a wide net and bring in more people into the funnel of getting them to get a personalized mantra and have this experience. Yeah.
I'm a little bit confused. Is One Giant Mind Vedic meditation?
No.
So no. How would you describe One Giant Mind?
So One Giant Mind uses a very simple model based on the 5 basic functions of the mind. The 5 basic functions of the mind are emerging out of being, the unbounded awareness of self, is the capacity to witness. And through the capacity to witness, we behold an experience of our individuality, and we perceive that we have a nature. And when we observe that nature, we notice that nature is expressed through a coherent, structured form of cognition, sensory perception, amounting to what we'd call an experience. And we loosely describe that nature as, or that awareness of that nature as intuitive perception. So we have witnessing that goes to intuitive perception, and when we are able to witness our intuitive perception, what we notice is that we have a cognitive capacity to process our intuition at different layers of thought. So the third layer of the mind, or function of the mind, is thinking. So we have witnessing, what we witness is our intuitive perception that structures itself as coherent thought. And once we have a splay of coherent thought in the mind, we tend to focus on content that appears intuitively relevant to us. And then once we focus on that content, we establish meaning and connection on a gross level that renders it useful for action in some kind of way, where we can be expressive of it. So that's a very basic delineation of the functions of the mind, which pertain directly to the traditional Vedic perspective of the mind, but just in a very sort of broad and loose way.
So you're not teaching people to transcend.
Yes, we are. We are. So this is the precursor to explaining what the technique is. So the model takes into consideration that there are different techniques that relate to the different functions of the mind. And so rather than looking at all the different techniques in the world as sort of disparate and non-complementary, actually, if understood sequentially, could all be practiced in a particular way where we could gain great benefit from practicing several different techniques within a sequence, as long as there is a baseline of the self established. So we refer to the one giant mind technique as a being technique. And what that does is it first enables us to establish being, so to then become aware of the witness. In the same way that Vedic meditation or transcendental meditation or Sahaja meditation, there's lots of different transcending techniques that are all, loosely structured similarly. And so we refer to the being technique as a transcending technique, but it's not just transcending. We're not just transcending, are we? When we transcend for a moment, and then we come out, we purify. It's not accurate to just say it's a transcending technique. That's why we refer to it as a being technique, because ultimately what it does is it establishes being. And so the one giant mind technique is a technique that uses a universal mantra that enables the mind to very gently move into that unboundedness of being. And and so people often ask me, why don't you just teach Vedic meditation? And I say, well, I do. I only teach Vedic meditation. And they say, well, why have you created one giant mind? Why don't you initiate lots of people in Vedic meditation as Vedic meditation teachers? And that is my long-term goal. And it is working in unison with an unrelenting pull in my conscience. And I seem to be unique in this way, maybe, or maybe not, but my position is controversial, and particularly within the Vedic meditation community, that it's difficult for me to sleep at night feeling the uneasiness of the planet, of the collective consciousness, knowing that I have knowledge that is very effective in liberating the suffering that is causing a swirling magnetic pull into like a self-implosion, a self-destruction mode. We're watching it happen day by day now. We've got front row seats to something that could turn into a potential calamity. And I've been sensing this for a long time. And while I was exerting all my efforts and then non-effort, invoking Ganesh, Lakshmi, all the big guns to assist in my plight in getting in front of people to give them Vedic meditation mantras, there was a barrier that I could not continue to ignore. And so I raised the question, is there something that could serve as a stepping stone that is more accessible, that could provide people with this experience and serve the need right now, which is to get people out of fight or flight and into a coherent state of cosmic consciousness, if only for a short time, to begin feeding the collective consciousness with the coherence that comes with this state of consciousness. Because this is ultimately the only thing that is going to cause transformation on the planet. Ultimately, everything that is going on the planet is a consciousness-based problem. Requires a consciousness-based solution. Nothing else is going to resolve what's going on the planet. And so if we're not addressing it on the level of consciousness, then, how are we going to resolve it? And like I said, I was initiating and continue to, initiate above average, but still nowhere near as many people as I would have liked to, or that I personally felt was going to shift the needle on what's going on in the planet. And so experimented and explored with, structuring a technique in a particular way that would have the effect of establishing being. And in my experimentation, have been so pleasantly surprised and by the effectiveness of what we now call the One Giant Mind technique in doing that. That then leads people into deeper inquiry, and it's a stepping stone. And there is a great argument against everything that I'm talking about, which I, from a traditional standpoint, which I am completely open to and receptive to, and let it wash over me every time someone presents it to me. I hear it fully. I'm like, tell me it again. Yep. And I let it run over my consciousness and my conscience. And then I sit and I ask myself the question, do I drop it now or do I continue? And my conscience always just says, for now, you keep going. And so I do. And this is how I operate, and I can tell you that it's cost me a lot of money. I'm not making money doing this. It's savor. And, people say, oh, he's doing it for this reason or that reason or this reason or whatever. And, it's brought me no notoriety, particularly amongst my peers. The antithesis in many respects. It's I've invested, so, I'm obeying my final level of feeling. Like I said, I listen to everything Tom said, and I live uncompromisingly in accordance with his teaching. And it just so happens that I'm operating outside of, the instructions that, have been more recently emphasized. That weren't necessarily when I was an initiated. None of this was on the cards. An app and all of this. A lot of things became introduced as a result of the work that I've been doing. I think constraints, and I respect all of that, and I don't blur the two. I refer to myself as a Vedic meditation teacher, and I teach as purely as any other devoted Vedic meditation teacher would. And I'm very proud to call myself that. And it's a beautiful thing. And I can live with the complexity of my position, and it's challenging in times because you want everybody to love you and to like you and to at least have the time of day to even ask these questions you are of me now, and to listen with an open heart. And but that's not always the case, and I've learned to live with that, because what's worse, not listening to my final level of feeling.
I thank you for sharing that. And I so many things came up when you were sharing for me as well, because I also have recognized barriers and done my best to step over them to encounter even more and find myself challenged with my choices of how I teach, present, create space, and a number of different things. And what I think is interesting is two things. One, as a teacher, I have an idea and a narrative in my head of what it is I want my students to do once they learn. And I've been fortunate enough to see some of their practices evolve or devolve into something that doesn't look like what I taught them, and being able to let go of my maybe nature to go, okay, maybe you're going off the rails, come back a little bit, to understand this is their story, this is their journey, and how they choose to integrate what they've learned from me is up to them. But it's also not the end either. Like this conversation that we're having, we're just looking at a snippet of time about what's going on right now. And in 20 years from now, 30 years, 100 years from now, it might look completely different. But I'm also always reminded with the thing about how I came to this practice and what led me to become a teacher was to, at the base, give to others the possibility of the same experience it brought me. And if that looks slightly or largely different as to how I came to it, so be it. Because the thing that always comes to my mind is it not that we're trying to get, like you've said, as many people possible meditating? If I have the knowledge, skill, and opportunity to help shift someone from their current state of consciousness or being in the fight or flight mode into something that is much more enjoyable, that leads to X, Y, and Z, I am going to do that. Do you know what I mean? And I think hearing your story, it reminds me too to take courage, because you're going to be faced with other people inside your own community. You're going to say, that's not quite the way to do it. And I love hearing you, because I obviously learned from you as well. I teach One Giant Mind. I also teach Vedic meditation, and I'm still in the process of reconciling both of those things. But at the end of the day, with other guests that we've had on the show, I keep recognizing that there is this large table at which I would love everybody to be invited to. And this is your practice, and let's get everybody excited about the practice. And in your story about with the Dalai Lama, you would think too, it's like, oh yeah, let's get the scientists, let's get all these people. And then to hear a gentleman like that say, well, do it in the name of love. You know what I mean? Is that what I'm doing? Are we doing what we're doing in the name of love? Are we trying to make the world a better place? And I thank you. And I think it's important for our audience to hear your struggle and maybe get a better perspective about their own struggles, about, purity or doing things exactly the way that they're supposed to be doing. And then understanding you have a heart and a mind, and you have your own fine level of feeling. And this is something that the technique has taught you to be in tune with, So I thank you for sharing that so candidly, because it's definitely helped me make the shift that I need to continue doing the work that I'm doing. So thank you for that.
Pleasure. And when we talk about the word purity, this is something that I'm engaged with deeply all the time. And what I've arrived at is, when we're talking about purity, for me, it's purity of intent. What am I really doing here? Why? Me being in the position that I'm in, I'm confronted with that all the time, like always asking myself, why am I doing this? Why? And I have a very deep relationship with my why, and I'm at ease with the way that I'm doing it, even though it's not necessarily looked upon as of value. If we break it down, the greatest criticism I think of One Giant Mind is that it's not really a value. I think that's the general. It's like it's a kind of a substandard, almost derailing endeavor, and it's my experience of that is the antithesis of that. In my understanding of what makes life meaningful, and what the outcome that we would hope Vedic meditation would deliver in order course correct somebody's life and therefore the collective's, trajectory. And when it comes to purity, it's really just about your why, your intention, why you're doing it. And this is the greatest gift that doing all of this over 10 or so years now has delivered me, is just certainty in my reasoning for why I'm doing it. And I'm not at odds with myself in that respect, and that gives me a great sense of power and capability that applies to all aspects of my life, and I'm deeply, deeply grateful for that. So it's revealed more of who I truly am, and this practice is supposed to purify us, and it has, and continues to do so. It continues to do so. Yeah.
Gorgeous. Jonni, we're coming up to the end of our hour together, and I just want to say thank you so much for carving out this time, as I know it's not easy, and sharing with us as candidly as you did. It is, I know for me, a pleasure to speak with you and to be in your presence. So thank you so very much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure, Derrick.
Thank you, Jonni.
Rory.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really lovely to just hang out with you guys and just share. Jai Gurudev.
Jai Gurudev. Okay, thanks for sticking around to the end. We're always looking for new ways to engage with you, our audience, and would love to know what topics and themes would be of interest to you. Also, who would you like to see as our guests? Perhaps you might be interested in coming on the show and talking with us. We would love to have you. Please share your thoughts and ideas with us with a direct message on our Instagram. And for those of you who are not camera shy, please feel free to share a video with the hashtag The Vedic Conversation. Also, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And if you found value in this episode, please share it with your audience and take a moment to consider giving us a positive review to help others find us.